Thrown into foster care, he loses not only mom and dad, but often brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandparents, teachers, friends, and classmates. He's cut loose from everyone loving and familiar. For a young enough child, it's an experience akin to a kidnapping. Other children feel they must have done something terribly wrong, and now they're being punished. The emotional trauma can last a lifetime. So it's no wonder that two massive studies involving more than 15,000 typical cases found that children left in their own homes fared better even than comparably maltreated children placed in foster care. That harm occurs even when the foster home is a good one. The majority are. But multiple studies have found abuse in 1/4 to 1/3 of foster homes, and the rate of abuse in group homes and institutions is even worse. But all this leads to one question. Well, more, but here's one. If so many children are being taken needlessly, and they are, why are other children left to die in their own homes? Why does it happen even in cases where the file seems to have had more red flags than a Soviet May Day parade? It happens precisely because so many children are taken needlessly. The two problems are not opposites that need to be balanced. The most important root cause is the same. When children are left in dangerous homes, it's almost always because the caseworker didn't have time to investigate properly. And what's overloading those caseworkers? All those false allegations, trivial cases, and cases in which family poverty is confused with neglect. Wrongful removal drives everything else. Get that under control, and caseworkers will have more time to find children in real danger. And that's why all over America, the only child welfare systems that are, relatively speaking, models for keeping children safe are systems that rebuilt to emphasize safe, proven approaches to keeping families together. So don't let anyone fool you with the big lie of American child welfare, the lie that family preservation is at odds with child safety. On the contrary, you can't have child safety without family preservation. Now, although far too much of what goes on at agencies such as DHS is kept secret, not to protect the child, but to protect DHS, none of what I've said about the harm of needless removal is a secret. Everyone in child welfare knows it. So why does it keep happening? Because there are so many incentives built into the system pushing it into the wrong direction. There are personal incentives. Worker walks into a dirty home. She can see that right before her eyes. But the harm of moving that child to foster care often is greater, but while workers may know that intellectually, it's an abstract concept. The instinct for the caseworker is to throw her or his arms around that child and get that child out of, quote, harm's way. In fact, they may well be putting that child in harm's way. That's compounded by the class bias and racial bias that permeate child welfare. Now, I don't know if those biases are any worse in child welfare and other walks of life, but it's no better. And as I said, child welfare does seem to be unique in the degree of denial. It is a sad testament to the arrogance that permeates much of child welfare that there is that denial, that somehow child welfare is uniquely immune. Now, in some ways, the bias in child welfare is actually more dangerous because workers for agencies such as DHS have enormous power to act on their biases with little in the way of checks and balances. And that's not just true of caseworkers. The biases also exist among judges and among the, quote, law guardians, unquote, sometimes named to represent the child's, quote, best interests. Then there are the political incentives. I have great respect for frontline workers and the terribly difficult job they do. But there's one thing in particular they often say with which I disagree. It's when they say, we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. Well, that's not true. As I noted at the outset, I've now been following this issue for 40 years. First as a reporter, now as an advocate. In all that time, I have never seen a caseworker, supervisor, or agency chief fired, demoted, suspended, slapped on the wrist, or excoriated in the local newspaper for taking away too many children. All of those things have happened to workers when they left a child in a home that proved to be unsafe. When it comes to taking away children, they're not damned if they do and damned if they don't. They're only damned if they don't. And then there are the financial incentives. Now, there are people on the far right who say the government makes money on foster care. They're wrong. But there are times when federal financial incentives can push a state toward using foster care instead of better alternatives. And often there are profound incentives for private agencies, which do make money on foster care, when they are paid for each day they hold a child in foster care. So their incentive is to prolong foster care stays and promote a take-the-child-and-run mentality. Now, on this score, as I'll discuss below, things are actually a little bit better in Philadelphia. All of these incentives can be overcome. To a degree, Illinois has done it. To a degree, Alabama has done it. Philadelphia can do it too. Indeed, thanks largely to the work of DHS Give Us Back Our Children, Philadelphia has come a long way. Here's the good news. In 2005, Philadelphia DHS took children from their families nearly 5,000 times. There were 4,790 entries into foster care that year. In 2014, there were fewer than 3,000 removals, 2,807. Now that's still far too many. But just stop and think for a moment about how many thousands and thousands of children have been spared all the pain of needless separation and the pain of abuse in foster home and in foster care because so many people, many in this room, demanded that it stop. And there's other good news as well. In 2005, nearly 1/3 of Philadelphia foster children were in the worst form of substitute care, group homes and institutions. Today, it's 13%. That's actually lower than the state average and slightly lower than the national average. And when it comes to the least harmful form of foster care, placement with a relative instead of a stranger, Philadelphia now does better than the state and national averages. But now we come to the bad news. One reason Philadelphia could make so much progress is because it was such an extreme outlier to begin with. Back in 2005, Philadelphia tore apart families at by far the highest rate in among America's big cities, even when rates of child poverty were factored in. With all the improvements since then, Philadelphia now takes away children at, as you've heard, the second highest rate among America's big cities. And that's partly a result of things getting better in Philadelphia, but at least as much as a result of things getting worse in the new champion for child removal, which happens to be Phoenix, Arizona. The rate of removal in Philadelphia is triple the rate in New York City and more than quadruple the rate in Chicago. And in Chicago, independent court-appointed monitors have found that reforms emphasizing family preservation have improved child safety. So the next time anybody claims that Philadelphia has to take away all these children to keep them safe, you might want to ask them, do you seriously believe Philadelphia children are 3 times safer from abuse than New York City children? Are they really 4 times safer than Chicago children?
Exactly.
And there's more bad news. After many years of steady decline, that 2014 figure for entries into foster care is higher than the previous year. And when the 2015 figures come out, they almost certainly will show that entries increased again. That's because of what can best be called post-Penn State paranoia. Janet Ginsburg of Community Legal Services wrote recently in The Enquirer that in the wake of the Jerry Sandusky case, the Pennsylvania legislature passed 23 bills making hundreds of changes in state law concerning child abuse. She writes that, quote, exactly 2 of those amendments may possibly have stopped Sandusky's abuse of children at an earlier age. All of the rest, and these are my words, not Ginsburg's, all the rest were just a bunch of grandstanding legislators trying to outdo each other in looking tough on child abuse and damn the actual consequences for actual children.
Yes.
Even here, there's some good news. The increase probably would have been worse if not for a smart move made by Anne Marie Ambrose when she was running DHS. She opted to accept a waiver from federal funding rules, which takes away that incentive I mentioned earlier for government to use foster care instead of safe, proven alternatives. If not for the waiver, I suspect the increase in entries would have been higher. But there did not need to be any increase at all. Now, DHS probably will say something like, well, what do you expect? Of course we're taking away more children. More people are reporting child abuse. No, more people are reporting, but it's not necessarily child abuse. More people are encouraged, sometimes required, to report anything and everything, so that's what they do. So what should we expect? More discernment, that's what. More care in determining which of these reports really are child abuse and which among those reports really require the child be removed from the home. That's what we should expect. For example, in New York City, the number of reports alleging child maltreatment was almost exactly the same in 1999 and 2014. But in 2014, the city took away fewer than half as many children. That's because New York City now has pretty smart, pretty enlightened leadership and a well-developed network of advocacy and high-quality defense counsel for families. And you don't have to look outside Pennsylvania to see that things like post-Penn State paranoia do not need to cause more children to be taken from their parents. In metropolitan Pittsburgh in 2014, entries also went up by 3. Not 3%, 3 children. And the number of children trapped on foster care on any given day in Pittsburgh went down. Once again, strong, smart leadership. Now, I began this talk with a story about a terrible tragedy in Maine. I'll conclude with what happened after that tragedy. People mobilized. And by the way, a lot of that mobilization was thanks to one fed-up foster parent. And we've seen what fed-up foster parents can do. A grassroots group organized an 80-mile march to the state capitol in January, in a snowstorm. A new state administration brought in new leadership. The number of children in foster care plummeted. By 2009, the transformation of child welfare in Maine was a finalist for an Innovations in Government Award from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. In Maine, too, there has been backsliding. No one familiar with that state's current governor should be surprised by that. But the fight goes on in Maine, in Philadelphia, and everywhere that a child welfare system destroys children in the name of saving them. And we're making progress. Thank you.
All right.